But it is what it is. Welcome, everybody, for another edition of Rock and Recovery. I am your host, Jay. Today, my guest is Christal, and I would try Badour.
Very close. It's Badour.
Okay, so I was almost right. So that's a positive. You know, normally I butcher names all the time, so I'm glad I didn't this time. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and your story today? What you
Sure.
want to share?
Yeah. I am a clinical psychologist. I'm also a professor of psychology, and I've been doing research in understanding trauma and addiction for many years now. And I kind of I'm a founder of an organization called Science for Survivors, and I do that outside of my work as a professor because I really was finding that in doing a lot of research in this space for a number of years, it seemed like we were doing great work and it just wasn't getting out to people who really needed it. And I find there's many things to love about science, but I think some of the ways that it's structured, scientists create information and then it gets stuck behind paywalls where regular people can't access it and can't get the information that they need. And so that's why I started Science for Survivors, and I'm using this platform to get information out to people in the community about what we know about the best evidence regarding the science of trauma recovery, because there's a lot of information and misinformation that exists out there.
Very much so. So why don't you tell us some good for survivors? You know, on that note, why don't you explain exactly what it is you go through, and just help us get through the next day.
Yeah. Everyone's experience is different. I think that people talk about trauma sometimes as if it's one thing, and it's really unique to the person. I mean, some people experience events that happen once in their life, and then that impacts and change their trajectory forever. Other people encounter multiple traumas that occur across the course of their life, and they can kind of build on one another over time. And the impact looks different. For some people, they find themselves in an environment where if they experience a trauma, it's very difficult, and it definitely does shape their future and their outlook on things. But they may be surrounded by people who support them and help them in their recovery from that. And then other people, unfortunately, don't get that kind of support, and people can find themselves feeling very alone, feeling like they can't tell anyone what has happened to them, and finding themselves kind of turning to strategies to manage the stress to get through their day in ways that, while it helps them get through their day, can have other kind of long-term negative impacts. I think substance use is one example that it can really help people get through the hard times, but can kind of take on a life of its own over time.
So, what exactly led you into this type of field? Did you suffer some traumatic experiences in your own life? Or?
Well, I was really always kind of interested just generally in how people navigate stressful situations and thrive in life. And when I was a college student, I was kind of going between thinking about maybe psychology, maybe law school, and actually did some work working for the Innocence Project, which is a really great group that works with incarcerated individuals who've often had life sentences, but have claims of innocence, to try to help them work through that process. And so I had the opportunity there to meet with several people who were in prison, and learn about their stories. And I found that really just fascinating, and helped me get a better appreciation for the complexity of people's experience. And then I really was quite personally impacted. So I lived in New Orleans, back in 2005 when I was in college, which happens to be the year that Hurricane Katrina hit the city. And so, from a personal impact, I have not had anything else in my life that has directed the course of my life so much. So I found that having to leave the city and return while it was rebuilding, and having the really great opportunity, I think, I got to work in some schools helping kids who were having a hard time adjusting to being back in the city, and helping them develop some skills to recover. That was really influential for me. And I really realized that working one-on-one with people, but then also doing research that would maybe help have a broader impact on how we support people in recovery, I think was really like that was it for me. That was the direction that I really needed to go.
Okay, that's really good. I mean, commendable that you're bringing more awareness and you want to help people in that field. Do you ever find it like, how do I? Some people don't want to listen to somebody that hasn't gone through a lot. I mean, a
I
lot
do.
of people would rather hear from somebody that's been through it than just talking about it. How do you deal with that?
No, I think it's a great point. And I think many of our recovery models are actually built on this. I mean, I think particularly in the substance use space, right? Peer recovery models are a major component of a lot of substance use recovery. And what I would say to that is I think that there is a space for various types of support. So I work a lot with sexual assault, sexual abuse survivors, and I personally am not a survivor myself. And so I can never understand the unique experience and perspective that someone has. And so I will say that upfront to people, because that's not what I bring. And in some ways I can never understand, but I can do my best to listen and support with the information that I do have. And I have worked with hundreds of survivors. And so from that perspective, I think each time I talk with someone, I gain a better understanding. But there's the reality of, if you haven't experienced it, you do bring a different perspective. And sometimes it can be helpful to have both, right? A professional as well as someone who has gone through similar situations and has come out on the other side.
So yeah, I know you're a researcher and a clinician. How did that research? What did you find in your research and the basis of the science behind survivors? What was some of that research that you did?
I've done a lot of work on understanding the different types of emotions that people experience after trauma. So, really, a lot of what we've understood about post traumatic stress disorder, which has been where most of my research has been really focused on fear and anxiety. But I've spent about 15 years or so studying other emotions that we know are important, like why do people feel shame after trauma? Why do people feel disgust? And how does that potentially influence their recovery in ways that we haven't historically looked at? So that's one area. And then the other thing I've really focused on is trying to think about how we can better improve our treatments that exist for people who do seek therapy. So we have some really great treatments for PTSD, as well as other kind of related concerns that can come up after trauma. But many people have a hard time getting access to those treatments. And then once they start, many people find them difficult to complete. Either they feel overwhelming, or they're just really demanding in terms of time, and people have a lot of other things going on in their life. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about what do we know about how our treatments work, and how can we make them work better and work for individual people rather than just kind of the typical person, if that makes sense.
So you just talked about treatment part. How does that help? I mean, what forms of treatment are there out there? Especially, let's say, for somebody, the abuse survivors, the trauma abuse survivors, the sexual assault victims. How do you even open a conversation? Do you have to wait for them, or what's the best steps on that?
Yeah, yeah. So trauma is such a common issue that I always advise. Like, I train a lot of clinicians, and when I train clinicians, I tell them that we should always ask about trauma. Every person who comes in for therapy for any reason, we should always ask about it, because even if that's not what they're coming in to work on at a given time, it may be influencing or impacting what they are coming in to work on. And I find that and the research supports this, that it doesn't cause harm to ask about people's trauma history. Now, people may not feel comfortable talking about it, and that's totally fine. But what can be harmful is if we keep it in the shadows, right? We don't talk about it. We signal that this isn't a safe place to talk about this. And one place I've seen this a lot is historically, when people have sought care for addictions, um, many clinicians and patients have talked about, well, this isn't the place to talk about this, right? If I brought it up to my therapist maybe said, well, we need to work on our addiction first, and then you can go talk to someone else about your trauma. And what that does is it really signals like this isn't a safe thing to talk about, right? Um,
Right.
and that's something that I'm working really hard to try as a starting place. Is we just have to ask about this, and we need to open the door and the conversation. And people are going to be in different spaces in their recovery in terms of, do I want to work on this? Do I feel like this is the most important thing in my life right now? Do I trust you enough to talk to you about this? But we can't get to that point if we don't ask.
You just hit on a big topic, addiction. Uh, Part of, I say addiction is a side effect of what the trauma that we've gone through and how we coped with it. And, you just said work on the addiction before the trauma. I think that would be a lot triggering to most people, because wouldn't you want to work on the reason, the cause of the addiction instead of the side effect? Wouldn't you want to work on the root cause of the addiction before
Yes.
you could actually address the addiction?
Yes, yes. And now we have a lot of research for a couple of decades now that has shown that people prefer to work on their addiction and their mental health concerns at the
Uh,
same time, because
yes.
they're so related, right? And for a long time, the mental health community just didn't have the research to support that. And there were a lot of beliefs and ideas that if we start to tackle trauma related issues, or other mental health concerns, it might make the substance use worse. And in fact, what we find is that if people have the right supports and skills to help them through working through that, we don't actually see that substance use gets worse. And in general, what we find is it actually gets better. Um, and so that's really the increasingly that's the approach that's being adopted in therapy locations, where when people come in, we recognize that they're not just there because they have substance use. It's a complex issue where oftentimes other mental health concerns, trauma history, all these things might be affecting why they're continuing to use, and we need to address both of those things together.
I agree. There's a lot of newer programs like dual diagnose centers. I
Yeah.
think they work both at one time. So it's, a universal. They'll do sometimes on the mental health side and then sometimes on the addiction side, but it all correlates because it really is all connected,
Yeah,
you know?
that's absolutely right. Yep.
And what are some of the myths about abuse survivors, sexual assault victims? What are some of the myths that they face in society, and why do they wait so long?
Mm.
Why do some wait so long to even open up a discussion about
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. There are a lot of reasons why people choose not to disclose, but a couple of the big ones that I do think feed into many of the myths that we hold in our society are the idea that people won't believe me, or they'll think it was my fault, or what happened to me wasn't that bad, and I should just sort of get over this. So we see all of those as reasons that people commonly describe, and that's a huge issue. So, one thing I think is that there's a lot of messages out there. I think less so for people who've experienced abuse in childhood, but for people who've experienced abuse as they've gotten older, or assault, there are a lot of messages that say things like, "Well, what were you wearing?" Or "Were you
Did you
drinking?"
provoke it?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And what I try to tell people, and this is sort of like a door in the face kind of idea, but you should actually be able to walk down the street intoxicated and naked, and no one should assault you. They should actually ask you if you need help.
Absolutely. In a perfect society, in a society that cares about human beings, I
Yeah,
100% agree with you. You
yeah,
know, and let's face it, that we're not there yet. I don't think we'll ever be, as a human race, be there, because there's always going to be somebody to take advantage of somebody else.
That's right. That's right.
And that's the survival. You be the survival system, whatever you want to call it, because the weak get herded out. And if you're in that type of position, then society or the animal instincts of people will deem that you're weaker and able to take advantage of you. And so I think personally, I could talk a lot about this because I just dealt with some of this earlier today. It goes along with that bullying aspect.
Mm,
You choose, it's a conscious choice to do something mean to somebody, and
yeah.
you don't have to do it. I don't care if you're in addiction, out of addiction, in your right mind, you still have to choose to do something to somebody.
Yeah.
Because once you put action behind it, you can say, your voices in your head could be saying, we should do this, we should do that, we should do this. Until you make the action to do it, it's still a choice until you decide to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you bring up this point, and this is a really ties into this mis idea, and the fact that we tend to shift responsibility or blame onto victims commonly, is that we always ask these questions like, what were you wearing? What were you doing? We're very focused on what was the person who was harmed doing. Why don't we ask the questions about, well, why did this person take advantage of them in that situation? And I think we are much less commonly asking that type of question because someone has to make a choice to engage in sexual activity with someone who is unwilling or is not in the space where they're able to willingly consent.
Absolutely. And a lot of that comes to what is wrong with the victimizer, and what is wrong in their life that they deem it okay to attack, use, whatever else, harm the other individual. I 100% agree with you on that. And why do people, it seems, even if they're in I found, I don't know about you, but I found that people open up small bits to see if they can trust you with small things before they can trust you with big things. And how big is that trust bond between somebody like you and, let's say, me coming off the streets and needing therapy or needing something? And how big is that trust bond?
Yeah, it's really important. We know that a therapeutic relationship is one of the biggest predictors of success. It's, for many conditions, it can be helpful to approach certain types of therapy over others. But the biggest thing is that relationship. And it's not surprising that people aren't ready to just open up about some of the most difficult things in their life right away. And for many people who've experienced trauma or who are experiencing addiction, they've had a lot of things in their life that have given them evidence that they shouldn't really trust people, right? Like bad things have happened, people have harmed them. They may have had negative experiences with doctors or mental health providers or addiction recovery centers before. So of course it would be difficult to trust about these very sensitive issues. And I find that sometimes when I'm working with people at the beginning, they share just a little, and it's not until we've worked together for a while that it becomes clear that there may be something else going on, or that they do decide to share more information. And my job, and I think all clinicians' jobs, is to meet people where they're at and work with them with the space that they're ready to go into, and to really someone coming into therapy, it should be their choice, right? What they're working on, what they feel comfortable with. And the therapist is really there to say, like, here's what the science tells us. Here's what we know can be most effective for many people, but we don't know if it'll work for you. And so my hope is that everyone who goes to therapy gets a collaborative person to work with who says, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and here's how I can try and help you.
So, what are some of the best effective techniques for dealing with like CPTSD and PTSD
Mhm.
that you found that work? What are some of the best things for these people that have these issues
Yeah.
to do?
Yeah. So there are a few different treatments that have decades of research showing that they are the most effective options for PTSD. And you brought up CPTSD or complex PTSD. Increasingly, the research is showing that these same approaches actually can be very helpful in complex PTSD as well. And so the treatments that are most effective do involve some type of processing of the trauma. And the processing looks different depending on the type of approach that you take. So, one approach that was sort of the first that was developed in really evaluated in kind of the early 80s, and so has been around for quite a while, is something called prolonged exposure therapy, and that really involves working with a therapist to intentionally bring into the therapy space the details of what happened and to process that in a safe space and to work through the emotions that go along with that, and then to also start to kind of gradually approach situations in their life that they may have been avoiding, because what PTSD does is it kind of shrinks down your life in a lot of ways, and people find that it's very
Anxiety, PTSD,
yeah,
agoraphobia, all these things really narrow your space, your life
absolutely.
space, you know, your community, your environment, down to somewhere where you feel safe.
Absolutely. And so this particular approach, prolonged exposure, is about helping you gradually approach those situations and broaden out your life. Not only like things you've been avoiding because they feel unsafe, but things that you want, things you may really enjoy, but feel like you haven't been able to approach because of the symptoms that you've been having. So that's one approach. Another approach is cognitive processing therapy, or CPT. And that one takes a slightly different perspective. It focuses more on, we understand that people's beliefs about themselves, about the world, about the future, they really change after trauma, especially when someone has PTSD. And often they may have really negative views about themselves, or they may feel responsible for what happened to them. They may feel like the world is an unsafe place, or they can't trust people. And so that treatment approach really helps people to recognize the way that their beliefs may have shifted due to the traumas they've experienced, and help them break that down and take a look at where there might be some space to maybe challenge those thoughts as they come up in your brain kind of automatically based on the things that have happened. And there's one more I'll mention, and that people may have heard of, is most commonly described as
EMDR.
EMDR. Yep, absolutely. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Mostly people just hear of it as EMDR. That is another treatment that involves what's called bilateral stimulation. So most commonly, you might be kind of tracking someone's finger or a light that goes back and forth, sometimes tapping or sounds. And then the therapist asks the person to go through various steps that involve kind of coming up with kind of components or thoughts or
Kind of
feelings
triggering.
trauma. Yeah, kind of situations that might be difficult to think about, but usually not all the details of the memory in the way that we see in for prolonged exposure, for example. And then they hold that distressing feeling present in the moment until that starts to decrease. Um, and many people find this approach can be really effective and really helpful for them. And so they all take a slightly different tact. And EMDR, some of the research on why it works now suggests that there may be some component of a distraction, kind of having
uh,
another task to focus on, like the
the
light or
tapping or the light
tapping.
or
Yep.
yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
that might make it a little bit easier in some cases for people to hold that feeling in the present while they're sitting with that distressing emotion.
So kind of like grounding yourself as you're going through it, you know, anxiety, same thing. You want to ground yourself. It takes about 7 seconds for your body, your mind to, if you tell yourself something, if you're thinking a thought, oh my God, this is terrible, terrible, terrible. If you think a thought and repeat it for 7 seconds, your brain rewires itself and it flips and you'll get out of that situation. You know, I don't know if you knew this or not, but it takes 7 seconds for your brain to actually rewire and get you thinking in a different way. So if you're thinking, and let's say you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to go into Walmart. This is going to be so stressful. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. If you start just for 7 seconds saying, I've got this, I've got this, I've
Mhm.
got this, I've got this, I've got this, all of a sudden your brain gets out of that negative headspace, that negative thinking, and it says you're able to continue, once you get in there.
Yeah, I haven't heard like that 7-second rule, but I think the idea is very much consistent with the way that we think about things. So if you're able, a lot of times what happens is that initial distress is so much that people have to get out of there, right? Whatever it is, I have to stop thinking about this. I have to get out of this situation. And they never actually give themselves the chance to stick with it long enough to see that that distress and that anxiety will go down, and that's the way our brain is wired. We get used to situations, even really distressing ones, and so if people give themselves that space and that time, usually those intense emotions will start to come down to a manageable level. But sometimes it takes some time and some practice for people to feel confident that actually I can handle this if it comes up.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And can you explain exactly what trauma is? Because a lot of people, I think, get it wrong what trauma
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So the way that researchers define trauma looks a little bit different than the way I think it's often talked about in social media or just kind of generally in conversation. And so the way that it's defined is any situation that involves um, threat of death or actual death or serious harm or injury or the threat of that, or a situation that involves some type of physical violation. In the example of like sexual assault, many times there's not a fear of actual physical harm, but there's a violation component. And so that can happen in a few different ways. It can be you've had something very stressful happen to you personally, where you feel like your life was in danger, you thought you might be seriously injured or harmed, or you were seriously injured or harmed or violated. It could be that you witnessed something happen to someone else, including witnessing the death of someone else. It could be also learning about it happening to someone close to you, a loved one, someone who you care about closely. And then we also actually see this happening in people who have certain jobs where they encounter the details of other people's trauma repeatedly, like first responders, therapists actually who might be
Like your
working.
job could be traumatic to
It
you.
can. It can. And we see that happens for many therapists. They start to kind of take on some of the symptoms that of the patients that they work with when they're exposed to that over long periods of time.
So, what is a long period of time? Could it be like 1 day, 2 days, or is it one event? Because an event can be infinite.
Yeah.
So, what defines a long period of time?
Okay. Yeah. So I should backtrack and say that it doesn't require exposure over a long period of time. And often we see for therapists, we see that when they get started, they might be kind of have more space, have more breathing room, but that as they are hearing these details, if they're not having that opportunity to have the space and the support that they need, they may start to take on those symptoms. When we talk about trauma broadly and all the ways that it can happen, it does not take something that happens over a long period of time. It can be one moment. And so I think about, for example, a car accident that people can develop, for example, PTSD from. That can just be one moment, right? It can be lots of different things that might last longer, like prolonged experiences of abuse, um, combat exposure. For many people who are in combat, there might be one situation or there might be many where they were feeling like their life was in danger or they were just constantly on that alert for danger. So it really varies tremendously based on the person's experience.
So, I know a lot of this. I'm going to read one of these questions off Podmatch because I thought it was a good question.
Sure.
Uh, how does trauma intersect with substance use, OCD, or other conditions, and why do we often miss these connections or the
Mm.
correlation between them?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first I'll answer the second part of that first. Why do we often miss these? Well, because People who work in mental health spaces are often kind of trained as specialists. And so if I say am trained to look for trauma and to deal with trauma related issues, I'm often my lens is going to be focused on that. And I may not have as much training in how to work with people with substance use or how to work with people with OCD. And I might not necessarily ask the questions that would help me understand that someone is also experiencing these other related problems. So that's where that comes from. But how does trauma and things like PTSD overlap with something like substance use or something like OCD? It's a little different depending on what condition you're talking about. But with substance use disorder, we do find a common relationship is that people experience a trauma and they use substances, or they might increase their use of substances to help them cope with the symptoms that are very commonly experienced right after a trauma. Or they might have prolonged PTSD or depression or other mental health concerns, anxiety, and substances help with that, right? If you're having a hard time sleeping, substances can often help. If you're feeling like it's hard to be around people because your anxiety is so high, substances can help manage that, right? So people will often initially use substances to kind of help them cope.
Yeah,
Yeah, to cope. And then over time, substance use, can cause a problem on its own.
absolutely. And what does society get wrong trying when they're trying to help? What do me or the next person? What does the general society get wrong when trying to listen to somebody with trauma or help somebody through their trauma? What do we get wrong,
Mm.
and what
Mm.
do we need to be aware of?
Yeah. I think one thing that people often do is they try to jump in to fix um, or offer advice. And while that may be helpful for many people, that's not what they're looking for. If they share with you that they've experienced trauma, one of the things that we know we can do to most support people is to tell them that I believe you and that this happened. I support you. What do you need? How can I help you? Rather than jumping in to say, oh, you should do this or you should try this. Sometimes that's not what people are looking for, right? Sometimes they look for, do you want to tell me more? Not to be told you have to or what happened, but I'm here for you if you want to talk about it. So I'd say that's
And
probably one of the biggest things.
the biggest thing is, and for the person, is just being able to sit and listen. I
Yes.
think that's one of the biggest qualities of anybody, is just to be able to sit and listen without judgment, without
Yep.
passing any judgment, and
Yep.
just honest conversation with somebody
Yep.
and feel understand their feelings.
Yes. And it's really hard to hear that someone you care about has experienced trauma, right? And so many very well intentioned people have a couple reactions. One is they get very upset themselves, which is understandable. But for the person who's disclosing that, that sends a message. It can send a message like, this is too much. You
Right.
are too much.
Right.
And so if you do learn that someone you care about has experienced trauma, I think an important thing is it's about them and your
Right.
feelings are valid too, but making sure that there's the space for them. Um, that's a big one. Um, and then the jumping in to try to fix and solve it. Maybe they want help with that, but I think that's an important thing to ask. How can I best support you here?
So another question I've got is, how do families or just friends or community help the trauma survivor?
Mm,
And what are some of the best things that they can do to help somebody? I know we just talked about listening, and
yep.
that's one of the biggest ones. But what are some of the other things?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things. I think in terms of, friends and family members, it can feel very isolating and people can feel very alone after trauma. And so an important thing to recognize is that um, being there and continuing to be there. So people often talk to me about in the short term after trauma happens, if other people know about it, everybody's there. Everybody's there to support and bring casseroles and do all those things. But in the long term, people often feel quite alone. And so I think it's important to continue to offer support, and it's important to continue to invite people to do things, to engage, to stay connected, and recognize that they may say no, but it's not about you, right? It's often about that they're struggling to manage the
Don't
feelings.
quit asking, even
Don't
if
quit
they said
asking.
no.
That's
Don't quit
right.
asking. If they
Jump on
said
it.
no 100 times.
Don't
It
give
might
up.
be 101 time that they need.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's one big thing. And another, if we sort of broaden out, you asked about what communities can do. And I think that an important thing is recognizing a shift from when someone's struggling. Historically, in our society, in our workplaces and organizations, we've often kind of been like, "What's wrong with you? Why aren't you performing the way that we need?" And if we take what has been described as a trauma-informed approach, we shift the way we actually ask those questions. So instead of saying, "What's wrong with you? Why aren't you performing well?" we ask the question of, "What's happened in your life that's making it difficult for you right now?
Or what can I do to help?
What can I do to help? And how can we structure environments so that people who've experienced trauma can be successful?" And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to change everything about everything you do, but it could be things like, are there ways that we can uh, structure our parking lot with lights so that people feel safe when they leave? Are there ways that we can provide flexibility in whether people work from home some days if they're having a really difficult mental health day? Can we give people choices in the tasks that they're doing? Because we know that one of the things that happens for trauma survivors, a lot of time their choices are taken away. And so when people feel like they don't have choice, that can often be really triggering for them. So letting people know what to expect, that's another thing. When people have experienced trauma, a lot of times just unexpected situations can lead to higher anxiety levels. Can we just be upfront about here's what the agenda is, here's the kinds of things we're going to be doing and talking about. And we know that those types of approaches can be really helpful so that people have the support that they need to reach their potential.
I agree with 100%. And what does, how do I say this? What is somebody that's dealing with trauma daily? What are some of the biggest things that, some of the biggest hurdles that they face? And how can, you know, after going through it and sitting with it and starting to talk about it, what can they expect as they're going through the trauma? What kind of things do they need to be aware of? What kind of triggers or emotions do they need to be aware of for the
Mhm.
trauma survivor?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to say it's probably going to look different. And I think that, because trauma can lead to a lot of different outcomes. And in the case we were talking about, where you might go through your trauma in therapy, that's often if someone's seeking treatment, for example, for PTSD or complex
Right.
PTSD, like you said. Now, someone who is having sleep problems from their trauma, or someone who's having difficulties just with trusting and entering into new relationships, the things that they might have trouble with might look a little bit different. So I don't want to, make an overgeneralization here, but I think if to your question about if people are starting to open up about their trauma, say in therapy or outside of it with friends or family, what can they expect? And often it's that when you first start to talk about these things, it can be like ripping off a Band-Aid, right? It's uncomfortable, it's painful.
Hurts.
It hurts. It's like the first workout and you're very, very sore afterward, and you have to do it. You have to do it and get through that pain before you start to feel better. And so for many people, when they first talk about it, they might notice that they're more jumpy, or they might notice that they're more emotional, or they have trouble sleeping. And that's the brain's way of trying to, this is an opportunity for me to make sense of this awful thing that's happened. And it starts to try to do that. And if we give it the space to do that, it will work through what has happened and things will start to improve.
That's awesome. One thing I want to talk about is people that suffer from suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
I've got a couple friends that deal with this daily.
Yeah.
And what's really
I don't understand it necessarily. And
Mhm.
how can I help my friend better,
Yeah.
or anybody else that's going through that better?
Yeah.
What do I need to be aware of?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, suicide is probably the biggest thing that we don't talk about as a society, I think, in the ways that we need to. People are scared to talk about it. A big concern that people have is like, if I talk about it, will I make it more likely that someone will have these thoughts, that someone might follow through with actions related to suicide? And I just want to say, like, the research is very clear about that. Talking about suicide or asking about suicide does not increase the likelihood. And what it actually does is it signals to someone that it's okay to talk about this, that I'm not afraid of this, that I care about you. And that is often the very first step. So if you could do one thing, it's talk about it. Um, and many people after trauma experience thoughts about suicide. And they sometimes are more general things like, it would just be better if I didn't wake up. And sometimes it's more specific, having specific thoughts about how someone might end their life. And what can you do to support someone who is going through that? I think one of the biggest things, in addition to just letting them know that you're here, is talking about ways that they can seek support, because many people don't feel equipped to like support their loved ones. So encouraging people to get therapy, to talk with their doctor. There are crisis hotlines. This is something that everyone should know about. So nationally in the US, you can dial 988. That's right.
In
Anytime,
UK,
any
Canada,
day.
it's 111.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's so important, right? To know that that's available, that someone's there anytime. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that we can do for our family and friends, is just talk about it.
So bringing awareness to it,
Yep.
being more open, having open and honest conversations, and not being scared to talk about
Yep.
it. I
Yep.
think I don't know if that helps or not, but I think as a society, the more people that are able to talk about it,
Yep.
I think the better off people would be.
Hmm.
You don't get that, other people don't get that fear of, oh, am I going to be too much? I don't know
That's
if I
right.
want to tell this person because, oh my God, then I'm burdening them. And then you're going to feel worse about yourself.
Yep.
And it just spirals out of control,
That's right.
you know. And I think I commend you for what you do. You're the founder of the Science of Survivors, and I know we went through on how you got that. What's the most rewarding things you've done as the founder of Science for Survivors?
Um, I think it's been a combination of working individually with people. I've worked with many trauma survivors in my life, and I find the work to be some of the most rewarding is helping see people go from places where they feel hopeless to really feeling hopeful and excited about their future. So that, I mean, there's not many other jobs where you get that type of experience and connection with someone. And then I think the other one is conversations like this, and I get to do a lot of work with young people. I talk about the hard things that we don't like to talk about in our society. I train young people in how to ask their roommates and their friends and their siblings if they're thinking about suicide. And I do that because I think, like, we all have to do that, right? We all have to talk about these things. And I'm in such a fortunate position to be able to advocate for treating people with dignity and respect, and letting them know that we value them. So I think that's been what's been most rewarding for me.
And I know this is part of this whole conversation. Has there been a rise in more traumatic events at a younger age, or is it a lifetime type thing, or is there like an age bracket where people get the most traumatized? I should ask. I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if
good
that's
question.
even a real thing, but I would like to know honestly is if there's like an age bracket where
Mhm.
people feel the most trauma.
Yeah, it really depends on what type of trauma that we're talking about. So when we talk about things, we've talked a bit about like sexual assault and sexual abuse. We do find that there is an age range where that's most commonly going to occur, and that's sort of early adolescence through early adulthood is the time that we see that most likely to happen. But when we think about other events like natural disasters or accidents, I mean, those can happen anytime in someone's life. And so it really depends. What we do know is that as your life progresses, as you get older, you're more likely to kind of accumulate more traumas, right? So as we get older, we tend to have that increasing burden of multiple trauma. And we do know that just each trauma that someone has, it just increases your risk more because it kind of adds that burden. It increases your risk more for various mental health challenges.
And I know for a fact that talking about it and having a safe place to talk about it and having safe people around you to talk about it lightens your load.
Yeah.
Don't ever feel a burden to somebody else. If they can't handle it, they weren't meant to handle it, first of all. That's plain and simple. You're just talking to the wrong person, because there's going to be a person out there that you can talk to, you can discuss anything you want with, and that person's going to be able to handle it because the other person's worth it, and they're not a burden. You just got to find the right people.
That's right. And many people, I think, are very worried about sharing things that have happened in their life with loved ones because they don't know how they'll react. And that's valid. People don't always react in the way we would hope, but there are people like me. Our job is to understand and to recognize these things and to support people. And so if someone's concerned about, I don't know if I'm ready to share with the people who are closest to me. Sometimes they can be the hardest people to share with. That there are people out there, professionals who are here to help, who are ready to listen and understand the kinds of experiences that you've been through.
Well, Christal, as we're coming to a close here, thank you so much for being on my show. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about something that's so hard to talk about, and that's trauma. Across the board, trauma is difficult to hear. It's difficult to discuss. It's difficult to open up about, because there's so many people that will use you and judge you and potentially harm you because of your trauma.
That's right.
That it is so kept in so much that it does more harm. It's eating you from the inside. So I really appreciate you coming on here and being able to have this discussion with me about trauma and the effects of it. If there's one thing anybody you want to take away from this, what would that be?
I think that I would like to say that so many people experience trauma, yet so many people feel alone. And I would say that you're not alone and that there is help available.
Absolutely. And if you're one of those people that are going through trauma, look up Christal right here. She's a founder of a freaking a great place, Science for Survivors. Come on, look her up. And how can people look you up and get a hold of you?
They can visit my website at scienceforsurvivors.com.
Awesome. And one more time, your name and what you do. I know you just said it, but.
Yep. Christal Badour, and I am a professor at the University of Kentucky and also a founder of Science for Survivors.
Go fucking Kentucky. Are you guys even? Oh, man, I was going to say something about sports related, but I'll leave it alone.
Yeah, sensitive issue. Yeah.
Thank you again for being on here. I hope you have a wonderful day. And that's Rock and Recovery. Until the next time, we are gone.